Federal prosecutors are turning their attention towards bank behemoth J.P. Morgan, which is accused of manipulating gold and silver prices for the benefit of their clients and their shareholders. Michelle Grinstein joins me now to explain what's happening with this case. First off, run us through these allegations, Michelle. You've covered this story a fair amount. It's a story that, again, corporate media isn't covering this one. What is your take on this story?
Well, U.S. authorities are building a case, although formal accusations have not been made against the bank. But according to two people who are familiar with the matter who spoke with Bloomberg News, U.S. authorities, like we said, are building a criminal case against J.P. Morgan. Now, both the bank and the DOJ declined to comment, but a bank spokesperson did confirm that the DOJ is investigating, quote, trading practices in the metal market and related conduct. So, Pat, what we're talking about here is metal market manipulation that is intentionally misleading or spoofing members of the metals market. So gold, silver, platinum, palladium, all of these are the precious metals, right? And what market manipulation looks like is this. They are placing bids to buy or offers to sell contracts on these metals without intending to follow through on them, without the intent to go through on these orders, to actually cancel these orders. So they're creating the illusion of either increased or decreased demand to influence prices and benefit their own market position. Now, of course, this reported criminal case against JP introduces the prospect of criminal charges and fines against the bank, although some say that's unlikely given the fact that it is the largest bank in the country and the close relationship that implies with the U.S. government.
Michelle, I believe I remember your coverage on the HSBC saga. Here, let me draw some parallels. We're terrified. The Department of Justice in this country is terrified to prosecute white-collar criminals who are dressed up in Armani suits, have a Rolex watch, an MBA from Harvard, and drive a Bentley. We will not prosecute them. HSBC, where we clearly knew that these people had washed money for terrorism. They actually signed documents saying, yes, we did that. Yes, we knew human lives were at risk. Yes, we know American soldiers died because of it. Yes, we did wash money for terrorists. Yes, we knew they were terrorists. And you know what? The Department of Justice lets them go. Now, I look at this case and I say, what more does it take? Now, this isn't the first time, for example, J.P. Morgan's been the target of allegations involving metal market manipulation. Give us a background on that, if you would. This isn't their first rodeo, is it?
That's right. It's not. And right now, there's actually a civil case that's frozen against JP. It's a class action against the bank and a group of precious metals traders employed by the bank. And the complaint alleges that they and the bank manipulated futures contracts, again, through spoofing. This goes back to November of 2018. And one of these employees, that same month, John Edmonds, actually pled guilty to engaging in a 6-year spoofing scheme that defrauded investors in precious metals, and he pled guilty to commodities fraud and commodities price manipulation. So here's the language of the complaint. Edmonds and several unnamed employees orchestrated a scheme to, quote, inject materially false and illegitimate signals of supply and demand into the market and to induce other market participants to trade against the orders that were placed by the defendant. So the class action says that these people are, again, manipulating futures contracts. Now, the reason that case is frozen is because then, a year later, in September of 2019, the DOJ charges J.P. Morgan executives of doing the same thing in a criminal case, manipulating the precious metals market by placing false orders of, again, gold and silver. So the New York federal judge decided that the civil antitrust action is frozen for now until the end of June 2020. But, Pap, here's what I think you're going to find interesting about this criminal case against these J.P. Morgan executives, one of which was the head of the precious metals trading desk, is that they're being charged under the RICO Act, which, as you know, is traditionally applied to mafia cases or other organized crimes. So prosecutors call it a, quote, massive multi-year scheme to manipulate the market for precious metals futures contracts and defraud market participants, and say that because the conduct was widespread on the desk, the DOJ is choosing to employ the RICO statute here. According to prosecutors, this was not an isolated case. It was going on to close to a decade, spoofing the market for years by manipulating thousands of orders for gold and silver to benefit the bank's own market position and, of course, the position of its clients.
So you have to ask yourself, at what point will federal prosecutors understand just because they don't look like criminal thugs, because they're dressed up different from the mobster, maybe, just because they don't look like that, The DOJ says we're not going to prosecute. You know, you have to wonder, Michelle, and I want to follow up on this story as it develops. You have to wonder, what does it take for us to understand that cultural change in this country about how we treat white-collar thugs it's got to take place sooner or later. It should take place here.
Right.
Michelle, thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you.
A federal appeals court ruled that a Mississippi police officer who had driven and left a disabled man at the county line wasn't liable for the man's death after he was struck and killed by a passing vehicle. Very complicated case, but it's pretty straightforward in what the police officer did wrong. I have legal journalist Molly Barrows with me to talk about it. Lay out the facts of this case. I mean, I read the first 3 or 4 paragraphs of the case, and it's clear to me due process, equal protection, all these constitutional issues come into mind. But the appellate court, Fifth Circuit, probably one of the worst circuits in the country, says we don't see any problem here.
Oh my gosh. And when you hear the facts of this case, you think, why don't you see any problems with this? And basically what happened is this particular officer, Darren Fleming, was assisting 2 city police officers in this city in Mississippi. And it was the town of Kosciuszko, and the county was Attala, pardon me. And so he was assisting these city officers who found this man, Gerald Simpson, walking in the middle of the road. He couldn't speak clearly. Turns out he had a speech impediment. He'd been treated recently at a local hospital for developmental disabilities. He lived with his sister, who was essentially his caretaker, and he'd gotten out that night. So he was walking in the middle of the road. The city officers find him. This deputy comes and assists, puts him in the back of his patrol car, takes him to the county line, and basically says he's giving him a ride home, but he never asks for his identification. He never asks for any kind of information that could help lead him to some family member or to where this guy actually lives. So he took him to the county line, which, when this man's family, where he was hit and killed. So he drops him off, leaves him, makes sure he's walking out of Attala County, and then he takes off. And Mr. Simpson was later hit and struck by another vehicle that night and killed. And his family filed a wrongful death lawsuit, not only against this officer, but also against the 2 city officers in the city
let me lay this out just a little bit on the legal aspect. First of all, this is a county that does this, city and a county that work this little scam all the time. Homeless person, somebody who's drunk and maybe just living on the street, they don't know what to do with. They just take him to the county line, drop him off. Obviously, this police officer concluded because he had a mental disability, this man had a mental disability, his speech impediment, probably concluded that he was drunk and that he was a homeless man, although he was being taken care of by his sister, as you point out. What really sends me over the edge on this is the Fifth Circuit saying there was no constitutional violation here in what happened. Due process. Okay, would we have not at least given this guy the opportunity or somebody to explain he has a mental disability, he has a speech impediment?
Didn't bother to look into it.
Or how about equal protection? You think if this character was dressed up in a suit with a tie, carrying a briefcase, that this cat would have driven him to the county line and dropped him?
Absolutely not. He would have
home.
said, like, oh, where do you live? How can we help you? You know, you appear to be an upstanding tax-paying citizen. But basically, they said that he was entitled to qualified immunity, this officer was, and that's why he couldn't be sued for wrongful death, which essentially allows a government official to be shielded from civil liability if it doesn't violate a person what's called their clearly established constitutional rights. And they were saying in this particular instance, it wasn't clearly established that his constitutional rights were violated because, and I'm not entirely sure I follow the reasoning, but it's like... A first-year law student would look at the facts of this case. A first-year law student would say, what about due process? What about equal protection? This guy looks different than Mr. Businessman. So it wasn't equal protection.
There was no equal protection here, and that's a basic, fundamental constitutional right. How about due process? This officer makes the determination, hey, I'm just going to be the judge and the jury. I'm going to carry him to the county line. I'm not going to make any effort to figure out what's his disability? He doesn't sound right. He's not speaking right. I can't smell alcohol, but something's wrong here.
Well, and what do you do if you're not there to serve and protect? You're only there to serve and protect the people that you feel like qualified to have their constitutional rights protected. And in this case, I was surprised that they actually upheld that decision. A lower court said that they had actually dismissed the case against the 2 city officers in the city, but they had allowed it to move forward against the county and this particular deputy. So it was this, this Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that basically overruled the lower court's decision.
Nothing good comes from the Fifth Circuit, and we're always everybody. We talk about segments all the time. you know, the typical voter out there thinks, oh, I got to worry about the White House, I got to worry about Senate, I got to worry about the House of Representatives. They miss the fact that all the ugliest things happen at the trial court level, the appellate court level, and when they start packing those, when those are packed with ideologues, this is the kind of thing that happens.
Well, that's exactly what I wondered too, Pap. And I know you're wrapping it up, but I thought, how could they justify this decision? It's one of those things it just seems obvious. They should have been doing their jobs and protecting this man. At the very least, should have taken him someplace where they could have gotten to the bottom of who he was. Yeah. And I thought, oh, maybe they just decided this deputy's career wasn't worth ruining.
You could ask any lawyer in the country, and they'll say, oh, it's the Fifth Circuit. I mean, isn't that awful when it gets to that point?
Terrible.
Thank you for joining me, okay?
Thanks, Pap.
Every year, 1 million hernia surgeries are performed in the United States. Unfortunately, some mesh implants that are used in these surgeries have caused complications, including infection and organ damage that led to surgeries to correct those problems. If this has happened to you, learn more about the hernia mesh lawsuit by going online to hernia.law or call us for a free consultation about your legal rights.